right? And as students of architecture, space is something that you all are intimately concerned with. You all talk about space, you all talk about built form in your classrooms, you all are constantly talking about how to think about built form in ways that are connected to the ways in which people live, right? One of the things you are taught is that how do people live, लोग कैसे रहते हैं और हम उनके लिए कैसे ऐसी जगह बांध सकते हैं जो that are comfortable, that are also in keeping with environmental practice, that are also reflecting. And this is something that I understand from your teachers, is something that you all are doing as well, that are also reflecting on power structures in society, right? We live in a world, as I began by saying, that is a world of power structures. That is that there are inevitably people with power and people without power. All right, as middle class students, and one of the things I always encountered among my middle class students, that I used to teach for many years, I taught for 4 years. In the early 2000s, for 4 years, I taught undergraduate sociology. And I taught in a college where I had a lot of middle and upper middle class students who would often see feminism, who would often see questions of gender equality as something for either poor women or women in the villages. Yeah? That we in the cities, we have access to education, we have access to resources. And then we would bring up the question of restrictions on public space. So if you ask young women particularly, and college going women, that do you have the same degree of access to public space as your male peers do? Or do you have to be home before dark? Right? We're constantly telling young women that be home before dark. And this is framed around the idea of safety. Abhi, I spent many years researching this, spending time thinking about safety, thinking about risk. But safety is so hardwired into us. And I now have a child who's 14. Okay? And some time ago, she had a crop top on and she said, oh, I'm going to the grocery to buy something. So I said, are you going in that? Of course, my 14-year-old has grown up around me. And so she said, Acha, now you're going to police what I wear. This is what you're telling me. What will you tell your students? Will you say this to your students? So safety is also hardwired into us. We are very anxious, right? However, one of the things we learned when we were researching women's access to public space is that safety is often seen as a very safe goal. So you talk to anybody, you go to the police, you go to the BEST, you go to anybody and say we want to work on women's safety. Very happy. They're very happy to work on women's safety because they feel that A, that women should be safe, and B, that women's safety also presents a good image of our city, a good image of our country. I don't know if you all have followed the recent the recent gang rape of a Brazilian tourist in Jharkhand, in the Dumka forests in Jharkhand, right? And a foreign journalist tweeted about this, saying that, and he said that I have also heard from other foreigners how they are treated in India. Now, the reply that came from the chair of the National Commission for Women is, why are you defaming our country? Now, I want to ask you, does a tweet from a journalist defame the country? Or do the actions of the National Commission for Women, which instead of addressing the question, instead of addressing this and rushing to say what can we do to address this situation, how can we make spaces safer, you immediately react by saying who is defaming this country, right? That by simply saying that this is happening, by talking about what's happening, you're saying that the country is being defamed. So I want to raise the question of who is defaming the country and what defames the country, and I will return to this question. Alright, so now safety is a safe goal. It also aligns, very unfortunately, with patriarchal values. So if we want to keep our women safe, हम उनको अंदर ही रखेंगे, घर में ही रखेंगे. Then they are safe, na? Now, The problem with this vision of safety is that then if you're in the house, you're only safe from outsiders. This vision of safety is about preventing attacks from strangers in public space. अच्छा, however, ग्लोबल स्टेटिस्टिक्स, सिर्फ इंडिया में नहीं बाहर भी स्टेटिस्टिक्स हमें बताते हैं कि द मैक्सिमम नंबर ऑफ अटैक्स अगेंस्ट वुमेन टेक प्लेस इनसाइड द हाउस एंड आर परपिट्रेटेड बाय पीपल नोन टू वुमेन. यानी कि हमारे घर वाले ही महिलाओं पे सबसे ज़्यादा, अपने महिलाओं पे सबसे ज़्यादा हमला करते हैं, right? And we have laws on domestic violence, and this is not just husbands and boyfriends, it's also fathers, brothers, right? And very often women are far more willing to make a domestic violence case against a husband than they are against a father or a brother. So there's that as well, but we won't go there. Now, so when we say safe, we are only talking safe from strangers. We are never talking about safety. The other thing about the safety goal is that families, of course, are concerned that nobody should attack our daughters, our sisters, our wives, our friends. But they are also concerned, okay, that our daughters should not go out in the world and fall in love with or even become friends with quote unquote unsuitable men. One of the things we found was that there was this young woman and she would go for a walk in the park. And her brother kept telling her, कि why must you walk in the park? आपको park में क्यों जाना है? Gym में जाओ जब women's timing है. So you go to the gym, exercise in the gym when there are only other women. So basically the idea is that you don't go out, you don't meet anybody. And remember another thing about strangers, right? We don't want strangers to attack our daughters. However, in many contexts in our country, women and men enter into arranged marriages, right? Where they are expected after that to be intimately involved with each other. And those are also strangers, and our country still does not have a law on marital rape. Yeah? So the assumption is that by the act of marriage, women consent to sexual intimacy, right? So there are all of these contradictions that are constantly part of the world in which we live. So what we thought about, and the other thing about safety is that it is only about some kinds of women. So we would talk to the police while we were doing our research. And one of their big anxieties was that in public space, they could not make out the difference between sex workers and non-sex workers. धंधे वाली औरत कौन है और कौन नहीं है. And they would say, but why are these? So their anxiety is that the sex workers now are dressing like middle class housewives. They are dressing like college students, and we can't make. So their desire is that all the quote unquote respectable women should be inside after dark, so that then there is no confusion. Now this is a very odd kind of desire, right? That you tell women that. And the other, tied to this, the other symbol of women's lack of access to public space. Tell me, what do you all think is the greatest symbol of women's lack of access to public space? What is not available? And as students of architecture, I'm sure you all have thought about this. If you all go out late at night, okay, and you all are wandering on the streets, what is not available? Street lights, of course. I can hear some, absolutely. Washrooms, public toilets. Thank you, those of you who said that. The public toilet is the single biggest symbol of women's lack of access to public space. The idea is that most of our public toilets, okay, first of all, as hand, with the other hand, you're adjusting your clothing and you're trying to go to the loo. Yeah? I can see the women laughing over here. We have all done this at various times, right? So we are familiar with this. And even these few toilets, these terrible toilets that exist, they close. They close at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, depending on which part of the city. So what is the message that's being sent out to the citizens? That after 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, we think there are no women on the streets, right? Now, if in fact they were to stay open. So if you think of the local trains in Bombay, okay? There are local trains, and in the 1980s, the women's movement fought to have a compartment for 24 hours. Until then, all the compartments were only till like 9 o'clock. First it was 8 o'clock, then it became 9. And even now you will find that some compartments in the local trains, they are women's compartments till a certain time, and after that they become general. Yeah, you will hear people refer to them as men's compartments, but in fact they are general compartments for anybody. So there was, women actually stood and they picketed platforms in order to get a 24-hour compartment. Now when you have a 24-hour compartment for women, right, what is the message it sends out? That women belong in public space. When there is a 12:47 local from CST to Panvel, 12:47 AM, and there is a ladies compartment in there, the message that goes out is that we think women will be on this train at 12:47 AM in the morning, that they will be taking a train, right? Now this is a very, very important message, even if there are 8 women in that ladies compartment, okay? Even if the number is small, it's important that we have this. And it's important for you as students of architecture to recognize that infrastructure matters, right? Even if currently it is addressing only a very small population. So the thing is that we are always waiting for social change, and social change is important and it must work in tandem with infrastructure. But one of the things we wrote about, and we tried also, we met with people in the BMC, we met with people in the BST. One of the things we were trying to talk about was that the provision of infrastructure is an important precursor to making public spaces comfortable for everybody. Okay, I'm going to backtrack again to the safety discussion. So safety is not just a safe goal where they think now we'll keep everyone inside. Oh, I also want to say one more thing about toilets, okay? We've recently been hearing a lot about toilets, okay, and the government is committed to providing toilets. One of the ways in which private toilets in rural India promoted is to say that now your women won't have to go outside, right? Now, of course, it is important to provide private toilets, but not so that you keep women inside your house, yeah? That should not be the reason why you provide private toilets. It's important to have private toilets for reasons of hygiene. We also know that private toilets are a way in which sort of the lack of private toilets are ways in which women get all kinds of sort of health concerns. They don't drink enough water. So we know all of these other issues that come up. But to say that we need private toilets so that women can be permanently inside their houses is a little problematic, right? More than a little problematic. Coming back to safety. Safety as a goal, okay, attaches only or is available only to respectable women. So if you are a respectable woman, because sex workers, as far as the society is concerned, are not entitled to this kind of safety, right? In fact, they are seen as a threat to the city, like what I said earlier about the police, right? That the police themselves are very uncomfortable, that they are unable to distinguish between who are sex workers and who are not sex workers. So the other thing about safety is that it is A, about respectable women, it's B, it's about having a purpose to be in public space. So we welcome women in public space if they have a purpose, if they're going to college, if they're going to work, all of that is fine. But if they are in public space for no reason, for fun, now that is, and we've often been told this when we were presenting our research and when we talked about the right to loiter. And one of the things we'd be told often is, but why would women want to loiter? Even quote unquote good men don't loiter, right? So loitering, and I'll come back to loitering. So loitering is seen as this kind of activity that lafangas, lukhas, villas, taporis engage in, and good people should not loiter. But we'll come back to loitering. I want to stay with safety. The other thing about safety is that we found in our research that women, particularly young women, okay, were concerned as much, if not more, with their reputations than they were with safety. So I'll give you an example. So in some buildings, particularly buildings where everyone belongs to the same community, yeah, so they all know each other and there's a kind of community connectedness. Women told us that if they were going home late at night and a guy friend was going to drop them home, they would be dropped 100 meters away from their building. They don't want to be dropped in front of the building because somebody might see them being dropped home by a quote unquote boy, yeah. If they are dropped home late at night by a boy, then the building will start talking. And we said, okay, so how will the building talk? Say, oh, the security will see. Security will talk to domestic staff. Domestic staff will talk to their employers. Then their employers will talk to each other. And the bigger problem is if everyone belongs to the same community. So if they are all Gujarati Jain or Dawoodi Bohra or Saraswat Brahmins or any community, okay, across communities. There is no one community that doesn't have this. Then they'll talk to each other and then your reputation is spoiled. And if everyone, and the problem with everyone belonging to the same community is that if you ever desire to have an arranged marriage, then your bad reputation works against you, right? So women would put themselves, so if you're being dropped 100 meters away from your building at 11 o'clock in the night, you are taking the risk of physical safety in order to guard your reputation. Now, I will leave it to you to think about how ridiculous this is, right? We talk about safety, you want women to be safe, but then you create a context in which women voluntarily will place themselves at physical risk in order to guard their reputation. So in fact, then their reputations are more important than their physical safety, right? So this is the kind of complex conundrum in the middle of which we find ourselves. So we began then to think about how do we talk to safety, right? How do we talk about this? And we started to think about risk. Who can take risks? Now we live in a post-globalized world, right? All of you are born in neoliberal times. You are born in a time when the Indian economy has opened up. Some of us who were born in the 1970s and 80s remember a time when you could not get a lot of foreign-made goods in the economy, right? They were simply not available. If y'all are familiar with the Chembur, sort of the road going towards the Diamond Garden, there's a shop called there's a shop called Jama over there. Jama used to be a shop called Amit Store, yeah? Now, Amit Store used to have smuggled goods. So the front of Amit Store would be regular stuff and behind, so he had these shelves. And the shelves would open and inside were foreign perfumes, foreign chocolates, all of this which were quote unquote smuggled goods. They were not available in the economy, they were imported. You'll always say normal risk supply. Yeah? Please invest carefully. They say it very fast because they actually don't want you to think about it, right? Now, it's supposed to be a good thing to take risks, right? And what kind of risk? Economic risk. So when you take risks, you're rewarded. So if you're Elon Musk, yeah, and you take risks and you buy Twitter, forget the fact that you destroy it, but if you buy Twitter, then that's a risk and that's a business risk and you're a great businessman, right? So when you put in money or startups, yeah, startup is a term that you all have grown up hearing, right? So successful startups are risks that pay off. So these risks are good, okay? Certain risks, however, yeah, for women, the simple risk of going for a walk at midnight is too much, right? If you say, I want to go out for a walk at midnight, people will say, why will you want to take the risk? So this risk you don't take. Interestingly, okay, men are also at risk in public space. Men get attacked in public space, men get pickpocketed, men get beaten up. Many more men are victims of violence in public space than women. Okay? But nobody tells men, ki are baba, so dangerous, don't go out. So, for women, the risk of going out is too much, but men who can also and are often victims of violent attacks in public space. And in 2005, while we were doing our research on public space, so our research is now 20 years old, okay? And people keep saying, and when we were writing our book, which came out in 2011, okay, which is also almost 15 years old, we were always afraid. We said our book is going to date. When I say a book is going to date, means it's going to be old. The ideas are going to now be old. Unfortunately, 20 years after we did our research, those ideas are not. And now I feel it's like deeply unfair. When we were writing the book, we were afraid that the ideas would be stale. Now we are really sad that they are not. Right? That the book is as relevant 20 years after we did this research. So in 2005, and some of your teachers will remember this, in Bombay, there was one murderer, I suppose we should call him, on the streets of Bombay, who would kill his victims, and they were all men, and he would leave a beer can next to them. I don't know if any of you all remember this perpetrator called a beer man. So they used to call him the beer man because they would leave a beer can. And in most cases, he had either had consensual sex or sexually assaulted his victim. Yeah, but nobody, and all his victims were without exception poor men. Nobody ever said poor men are in danger on the streets of Mumbai. Okay, so who can take what risks is always a challenge. What is considered too much of a risk and what is not considered enough of a risk, right? Many of you will go out into the world to work, and a few days ago I was invited to talk to to do like a recorded chat that was going to circulate among white collar professional women. And one of the things I was talking about was, when we talk about risk, is that when women reach their 30s, as many of you will when you'll enter the architectural profession, and perhaps you will marry and perhaps you'll want to have children. Now when you're 30, okay, for men, having children is a no-brainer. Yeah, you're 35, you'll have a child, it won't affect your life, and nobody will think it's going to affect your life. Yeah, but if you're a woman, having a child or not having a child in your 30s poses certain kinds of risks. One, if you do have the child, what are the implications for your career? Does it mean that you will now be seen as a bad employee? Yeah, corporations are little nervous about employing women who are in reproductive age group, because now they'll have children and then they'll want maternity leave. Not having children means maybe you're a bad woman. Like, what kind of woman are you? You don't want to. So these are the kinds of risks that women are compelled to confront that men don't necessarily. So in relation to public space, we started to think about risk, and we said that what would it mean, okay, for that no space is safe. Like I said, our homes are not safe, right? The maximum number of attacks happen in our home. So what if I, as a woman living in this city, I desire to walk out at midnight, and maybe I will get attacked and maybe I won't. Maybe I'll go out and have a really good time and come back, and nothing worse than looking over my shoulder or phoning people and saying, now I'm leaving this place, now I'm leaving that place, will happen to me, right? Nothing worse than that will happen to me. And the chances are that in a city like Mumbai, which has public transport, which has a certain amount of what we would call zag, or like a kind of awakeness to the city at night, there are people on the streets, chances are that nothing more than that will happen to you, right? However, if you walk out onto, and one of the examples I often give is that if I walk out onto the street at midnight and I get hit by a bus and I break a leg, all kinds of medical and legal processes will apply, right? However, if I walk out onto the street at midnight and I get sexually assaulted, before any medical or legal process can apply, people will say, why were you there? Whom were you with? What were you wearing? What is the need to go out? Now, what we wanted to say when we talked about risk is that what women need in order to access public space is not conditional safety, but the right to take risks. Which means not that I should never be attacked because no space is safe, but that if I am attacked, nobody should question my right to be there. Nobody should say, "Aap kiske saath the? Samay kya tha? Kya pehna tha?" All these questions should become irrelevant to my access to public space. We then began thinking about women's access to public space, right? And as people who are Gen Z, okay, I'm sure y'all are all very well versed with, very well entrenched with questions of intersectionality. When I say intersectionality, we talk about the fact that women are not just women, right? Women belong to particular classes, we belong to particular castes, we belong to particular regions, we have many, many other identities, right? Now, I'll be slightly academic for a moment, and if it's not relevant, you can not pay attention or not disregard it. But the word intersectionality comes to us from a black legal studies scholar by the name of Kimberly Crenshaw. Now, Kimberly Crenshaw looked at a case, right, which was against the General Motors company. 5 black women employees filed a case, okay, of gender and racial discrimination against General Motors. And the court ruled that they had not been discriminated against. Now, Kimberly Crenshaw wrote, she said that the way in which the law operates is that they will look at this and they'll say, okay, General Motors employs black people, okay, so it is not racist. It doesn't look at the fact that most of those black people being employed are men. Then they'll say that General Motors employs women. They will not regard the fact that these women employees are white and that black women suffer from a particular discrimination that is not just gender, that is not just race, nor is it gender plus race, but a very, very complex mix of gender and race. And this is something that perhaps those of you who are on social media or who have engaged with questions of caste is something that something that in India we learn from the Dalit feminists as well, right? Dalit feminists point out to us that there is a Savarnaization of feminism, which is that a lot of the conversation on feminism is about the upper caste. And there is a masculinization of the Dalit struggle, which means that a lot of the conversation about the Dalit struggle is about men, right? So where do Dalit women fit in? Just as black women suffer from a particular kind of discrimination that is not just gender and that's not just race, but a complex mix of gender and race, so also in India, Dalit women suffer from a particular kind of discrimination that is a mix of caste and gender. And one of the ways in which we can think about this, right? If you think of the ways in which sexual violence is reported and which sexual violence appears on page 1 and which sexual violence appears inside, right? In 2006, okay, 2 Dalit women were raped and murdered in a village called Khairlanji. It took 2 months for this to appear in the national media, okay? A few years ago, a young Dalit woman was raped and then she subsequently succumbed to her injuries in a village called Hathras in Uttar Pradesh, right? Do you all remember this? It was very, very recent, yeah? Now, what happens in the Hathras case is not only, okay, is there no gigantic outrage, but the police lock the victim's family inside their house and cremate her body. I'm just going to leave that there, yeah? For us to think about the difference in the ways in which sexual violence against Dalit women and sexual violence against upper caste women gets treated, okay? In our country, there are also issues of religious minorities, right? I'm sure all of you recently saw the rapists of Bilkis Bano and the murderers of her family were released with they were garlanded and released. Thankfully, on a Supreme Court order, they are now all back in jail. But there is a question of intersectionality. We are not just, yes, there is a way to talk about International Women's Day, and it is important for us to talk about gender as a whole. It's important for us to talk about women, but it's important for us to recognize that not all women are the same either. All right, I'm going back to the question of risk. So what we began to argue was that safety is not enough, we need the right to take risks. However, we said these risks should not be forced upon us, which is that everyone, okay, that someone talked about street lighting, you talked about public toilets, that it is important that the city administration provide public toilets. that it is very, very important that public toilets are provided, that street lighting, public transport. One of the things that distinguishes Mumbai from other cities is access to public transport, right? All of these. So we said we must push the city administration, the municipal corporation, to provide infrastructure. Nobody should be forced to take risks not of their choosing, right? But if I choose to take risks, so if I want to go for a walk in the park at midnight, which unfortunately I can't do because all the parks close, okay, which is another thing. When we started our research, the parks would open in the morning, Diamond Garden here would open in the morning and close at night. Now, Diamond Garden opens in the morning, it closes at 12 o'clock, and then it opens again at, I don't know, 4 o'clock or something. Okay, it closes in the afternoon. So if you go and speak to people and say, why are you closing? They are afraid of vandalism and they are afraid of couples. Couples are so very scary, you know, they are so involved with each other that they are so scary to the rest of the world. And they are worried about the oh so delicate sensibilities of the elderly and the oh so great innocence of our children. Okay, so our children are not violated by all the violence they are watching on media, but if they see a couple holding hands, that is very violent for them, right? So there's this kind of surveillance, anxiety, constantly spaces are shrinking. What has actually changed in the 20 years since we started our research is that it's not any less or more safe, but spaces are shrinking. So if you go for a walk on Marine Drive, and actually it had already started to happen when we started our research, but when I was in college in the 1990s, and I went to a college in South Bombay, and sometimes we'd be doing some activity for our college, and we would miss the last train home. And we would be 5, 6 of us. So not a very large number, but not very small. And we would spend our entire night till the first train walking on Marine Drive. And there was an ice cream parlor there. We would go and eat ice cream. That parlor would be open till 2 o'clock in the morning. Nobody told us anything. And there were other people roaming on Marine Drive. Now, at 1:30, the police will come and say, chalo, go away, Marine Drive is unsafe. But Marine Drive is being made unsafe because you are emptying out of people. Right? If you let people be on Marine Drive would not be unsafe. The minute you empty the city of people, you make space. One of the other reasons why Mumbai is a safer city than other cities is, of course, now we have quite a lot of business districts, but otherwise, business areas, and this is important for you all as architects, residential and business areas are mixed, right? So there are people on the street at all times of the day and night. The minute you make a business, BKC, Nariman Point, Ballard Estate, they empty out at night and they become very uncomfortable, right? People feel nervous in spaces that are empty at night. All right, I'll take another 5 minutes and I'll close. The last thing that I want to talk to you all about is, so then we said, all right, okay, this is about women. Women should have access to public space, but it is not only women who are looked at with great concern in public space. Women are looked at in great concern in public space because they might be attacked, okay? But there's an entire category of men, lower class men, Muslim men, hawkers, especially migrant men. If you all, I can't say if you all remember, but in 2012, when there was that very widely publicized gang rape and murder in Delhi, the Prime Minister was quoted in the newspapers talking about footloose migrants. Yeah, so it so happened that, a lot of the people, the perpetrators of that attack were migrants to the city of Delhi. So there is a narrative about migrants. So migrant men are looked at with great suspicion. In the city of Singapore, for example, okay, when they have large construction sites on the roads, you know what they do there? It was, I mean, we spent some time there doing some research. They lock the workers into those sites at night. So there's a site, it has all those sort of enclosures, and at night the workers are locked into that site. Nobody thinks about whether there might be a fire in there or anything. The anxiety is, what will these workers do? Let's lock them up inside, right? A lot of lower class men have also reported, so just as women are not allowed to be out at night, we started doing very few interviews. We didn't do enough, but we did a few interviews with lower class men who access public space at night. Now, even there is this kind of line. Okay, so up to about 1 o'clock it's still okay. After 1 and before approximately 4:35 in the morning is when the milk roots, paper roots, all these start coming out. Okay, so after 4:30 or so it's okay, but between 1 and 4:30 men are policed as well. Lower class men particularly are policed on the streets, and one of the things that police do is they want to see their cell phones. They harass them for no reason. So even they are looked at with great suspicion as possible perpetrators of violence. Women are a source of concern in public space because women are potential victims. Men, lower class men, are a source of concern because they are potential perpetrators. So we began to realize that many people are outsiders to public space, and the only way in which we could claim unconditional access for women is if we claimed it for everybody else, which is that if you say public space belongs to everybody, the Lukhas, the Lafangas, the Taporis, the Velas, the migrants, the hawkers, and hawkers are really important. Okay, the city administration keeps trying to get rid of hawkers from streets. Women walking on streets will tell you hawkers provide eyes on the street, they provide extra lighting, and people are standing there, and particularly hawkers who've been on your road for a long time. So your security guard in your building might change every month, but the hawkers have been on that street sometimes for 20 years, right? You know them, they know you. So hawkers are often actually a source of what we call eyes on the street, and perhaps you all will engage with a very, very old American scholar called Jane Jacobs, who wrote a book called The Life and Death of Great American Cities, and she talked about the importance of eyes on the street. That is, the hawkers, for instance, who are on the streets, they know who's coming, they know who's going, they know what's happening on that street, right? So we began to argue that in order for women to have access to public space, everybody else, including those who are not friendly to women or who are perceived to be unfriendly to women, particularly sort of young men who might stand at street corners and sexually harass women. And I'm not saying this doesn't happen. Of course this happens. But we must claim the streets, we must claim the city for everybody. And we would be asked after this, after we wrote the book or we published this or we started talking about it, a lot of activists, women's rights activists would say, "Acha, this is all very well, you know, you all are say talking about loitering, but what about the men who stand on the corner and they harass the girls who are going for their classes, and our girls are so frightened, what do you have to say about that?" And the thing is that yes, there is street sexual harassment, right? But saying that these men should not be on the streets is not necessarily the answer. If you populate that street with more people, with different kinds of people, then the women walking on the street will look less unsafe, and the men who might be passing remarks will look less threatening, was the argument we made. The second question that used to scare us was that they say, "Oh, how will you operationalize loitering?" And we really, and you may have noticed I have a stammer, but we would stammer for other reasons because we really had no answer, right? We had built this beautiful utopian idea of what could make a city more accessible, but we had no idea of how to operationalize loitering. Interestingly for us, a theatre professional by the name of Neha Singh read our book in 2014 and started to use it to actually start loitering in the city. And she started a movement that she calls the Why Loiter movement. And there are many, many such movements, some of which have read our book, some of which have not, some of which found our book after they started the movement, who are talking about accessing the city, accessing the streets for fun, for pleasure. You all may have also read about the Pinjara Tod movement, which started in Delhi, which is that young women in hostels, college hostels, had a curfew. Means they all had to come home by a certain time. That time could be 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, but they had a curfew. Men had no curfew. So they said that our hostel has become like a cage, it's become a pinjara. So they started a movement called the Pinjara Tod, and similar kinds of movements are all over the country. You will, if you just do a little bit of research, you will find a lot of movements where young women are saying, by locking us in our hostels, you are impacting our right to education. That it means we can't go late at night to the library, it means we can't go to a play, it means we can't go out, and all of this is part of our education. So your locking us up is impact. So there are many, many movements that are now speaking about women's right to public space. And it's really, really important for all of us to talk about the right of women to public space, but also to talk about the right of trans people, the rights of migrants, that all of our rights and all of our access to public space is deeply tied to each other's right to public space. Yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you so much. I'm happy to take questions if anyone has questions or comments or stories. And in any language, I mean. Yeah, no, I'm okay. Huh? Actually, I'm quite happy here.
You're fine?
Yeah. Actually, I'm happier here. As a teacher, one is used to standing rather than sitting. Freddie, come on.
Hello, Dr. Shilpa. It was a wonderful talk, an extension of the book While Loiter. Most of us faculty members have read the book, and there are, lot of things that come to our mind. Like you said also, what will happen? So, in a layered society like ours, where there are layers of gender, then there are layers of economic background, there are layers of geographical location also. So the safety that is present for women in Mumbai is not present in Delhi. The risk taking looks like, unnecessary. Why? So this kind of, layered society, then religion is there, then caste is there, and then sects are there. There are different sects in a religion also. So one sect opposing the other sect. How do you isolate only women which has, these 6, 7, 8, 9 layers, and you say, no, this is how you're supposed to, you are a liberated person, you're supposed to do this. But she has these layers of, imposition on her. So how do we talk to women in that way? Because the woman is carrying a lot of, baggage on her back. So any thoughts on that?
So it is really, really hard, right? And like I said when I began, that I find that I also have deeply layered conditioning around safety, right? And our instinct is always to protect. And we don't often realize that protection can also be a form of violence, right? So when I tell my child, ki don't wear this and go out, or if I'm asking questions, or somebody else is asking questions, often the desire is to protect. But we need to recognize that for women, particularly young women, that protection, because it comes as restrictions, is also a form of violence. And that's really hard. And I remember presenting this work, and I said, but when I go home, some violence is going to take place. Someone is going to shout at me, somebody is going to say, you can't go out again, some violence is going to take place. But nobody calls it violence. We call it protectionism, we even call it love, right? Now, I presented this work in 2008 when I was child free. And my discussant was a sociologist. He was a man, he was an Iranian sociologist who had daughters who were, I think at that time, 12 and 14. And we had a very nice discussion, and afterwards we were talking, and he said, you know, your work makes me very uncomfortable because I see myself in it. Now, terrifyingly, 12 years or 14 years after 2008, when I have a 14-year-old, I see myself in it. And it's quite terrifying, you know, to realize that your own conditioning is so deep that you'll also start saying, and so when my daughter wanted to go to a grocery store in a crop top, I said, and this was about two years ago, I said, you're 12 but you look 16. So, you know, why do you want to wear this? You wear something else and go. She's saying, why? If I'm 16, it's okay if I get sexually harassed, is it? So, I mean, our children are always 4 steps ahead of us. So, there's this kind of, and I have no answer really. I really have no answer for her. So then at some point I'm going to have to say that yes, you have actually the right to wear whatever you want. So I'm not sure whether I'm answering your question, but it's very, very hard for all of us because we are so conditioned into this discourse of safety, right? In 1905, Rokia Sakhawat Hussain wrote a short story which I urge all of you to read. It's called Sultana's Dream, right? And in this, she creates a vision of a utopia. It's a environmental utopia and whatever. And she has this character called Sultana who, it seems as if she goes to sleep, okay? And it seems like this happens in a dream, but it's not very clear. But anyway, Sultana is reading a book and she falls asleep and she finds herself in a place called Ladyland. In a place called Ladyland. And in this Ladyland, she sees only women on the streets. So she asks this other woman who's her introducer to the place, she says, but where are all the men? So she says, men are in the Mardanas, where they should be. So she's very puzzled. So she says, but why is that the case? She says, because in your country everything is upside down. What would you do if there were some thieves who were stealing something, or if there were some lions or some wild animals who were attacking people? So Sultana says, we lock them up. So she says, yes, that's why it's all upside down. In your country, men who are capable of doing no end of harm are let loose on the streets and the poor women are locked up. Now, I don't think Rokia Sakhawat Hussain is saying we should lock up the men. But what Rokia Sakhawat Hussain is doing is she's showing us the irrationality of locking up potential victims and allowing potential perpetrators to be on the streets, right? In fact, this evening, the Loiter campaign, along with a queer group, is running a midnight walk. I think they're walking somewhere in South Bombay. And a lot of this is to make a very, very strong claim for women's right to be out in public space. But a lot of this irrationality, you know, when you tell women, don't go out after dark, we all think it's rational, that it's not safe to go out. No one says, don't stay at home after dark, but in fact, women's homes are the most. And all of you all must have read during the pandemic that there was a surge in domestic violence, right? And many women who were victims of domestic violence were basically locked up in the 4 walls with their perpetrators. But no one told. And though there was a very, very nice initiative in the Pune Zilla Parishad, where what they would do was, if there was a report of domestic violence, they would come and they would pick up the man and put him in a COVID isolation facility. They'd say, okay, let women be in their homes because homes belong to women. They would come and pick up the perpetrator. So I thought it was a really interesting initiative that somebody in the Pune administration thought about.
Hello. So Dr. Shilpa, thank you. Thank you for your talk. It was fantastic. You covered a lot of things in your talk, which I'm sure we're going to think about. We're going to talk about more than that. I don't know if this will turn into a question or I don't know where it's going.
A comment is great.
So when you're talking about, and I think we've also spoken about how deep the conditioning is. and we face that at different ages. And my understanding of gender opened up when I was doing my post graduation. Before that, I had the same thoughts, absolutely same. And when I go back and I'm like, कैसे मैं ऐसे सोचती थी, you know, when I would actually tell my guy friends, क्यों रो रहा है लड़की की तरह? I have said this when I was in my 12th, and I'm extremely ashamed right now when I think of it. But I always think that why does this happen so late in life? Aren't there proposals or aren't there ways in which academia, right from your nursery or your first standard or your second standard, we can have these issues so that parents who teach their kids are also probably talking about it? Has this been tried, or I don't know? It's always been on my mind.
I think there have been some initiatives in schools, and I think in the Delhi, even the schools run by this Delhi state administration, they've tried to bring in questions of gender at a much. And one of the ways in which we need to tackle this is also to address textbooks, right? Our textbooks were so standard. Your mother is in the kitchen and father is going to office. It starts like at that basic level, you know. So if your textbook started to change, and I think there has been some conversation. What level of impact there has been, I am also not sure. But certainly I know some schools are trying. They're at least trying to build a conversation around this.
But wouldn't that work? Wouldn't that be
Absolutely.
a way to...
I think it's so important that we take it right down to the school level, and hopefully that you educate parents also.
Yeah, because I think for girls as well as guys, I think for boys also, it takes a very long time to kind of come out of their fears of not being able to express themselves. And they're so old by that time that they grapple with those emotions that they have. So I guess...
And then they get stuck in this cycle. I don't know if the men in the class here are familiar, or if all of you are familiar with this sort of influencer called Andrew Tate. Are you all familiar with Andrew Tate? Yeah? Who's this kind of toxic, masculine presence, you know? And I don't know, there's a tweet we had. Did you all see his tweet exchange with Greta Thunberg? You're familiar with it? Alright, so then we can talk about it. Because we had a long conversation in my class about it. Huh? So what, I can see all of you all know Andrew Tate. Those of you who don't, just pick up your phones and Google Andrew Tate. You will get more information than you ever wanted. Yeah? So he's a very toxic masculine person, and he put out a tweet, and Greta Thunberg, of course, is the environmental activist who's been talking about climate change and so on and so forth. So he put out a tweet with some big car saying, "This is my car, it uses so many megatons of fuel, and so what are you going to do about it?" And she sent a tweet, and now excuse my language, I'm only repeating what she wrote. She said, "Yes, please send me information and write to me at smalldickenergy@something.com." Okay? Now we had a long conversation, because what she's doing in effect, that it worked. Her tweet was retweeted. It was, I think, the 5th most retweeted tweet in the history of Twitter. Okay? So it was very successful. Her response was very successful. Okay, so on the one hand it worked, but in my class we are having a conversation because she is also playing on his masculinity, right? So is that an okay thing to? We had a long conversation in my class that is it okay then? Because what she is doing is she's trying to emasculate him. Now that is a problematic thing, right? We would not actually cheer it. We would say this is a problematic, but any other response would not have got so many retweets that it would have become the 5th most retweeted. So it's a very gray area, you know, this kind of, you know, how we use masculinity, how we use femininity, and is it, what is the word? Is it justified? Is it not? I don't actually know the answer. There are many gray things to which, I mean, it's uncomfortable, right? You think that, what she did was not quite, it's not quite what one should do, right? We should not cheer it. But it worked. So, and you want to get back at Andrew Tate. You want to show Andrew Tate, because Andrew Tate is horribly toxic, right? And I don't know if in your schools he was a hero when you all were in college, but certainly my 14-year-old when she was in grade, and this is when she's now in grade 8. This Andrew Tate became heroic 2 years ago, and her grade 6 classmates were sort of talking about Andrew Tate as a hero. So it's really, really scary and problematic, right? So then a couple of parents wrote to the principal saying, can you please start a conversation around this, this kind of, maybe not Andrew Tate, but around toxic, what we are familiar with now as toxic masculinity, which hurts men as much, right? It doesn't only hurt women. It hurts men, and it hurts especially the men who are not that, who don't want to be that. And then they get labeled and they get attacked.
Hi, ma'am. Wonderful lecture. I just had a few thoughts running across my mind. So basically, like the rape case also that happened recently, I don't know, somehow I feel it's about the mindset of the men also. I mean, whoever has got those, it doesn't even depend on the education system, because there are educated people who are also doing the same thing. So how do we like safeguard our, kids or our girls then? Because we are also obviously trying to safeguard our kids from all these kind of people, and we know they're all around. So how do we take, I mean, those are few pointers that we always keep thinking, okay, we have to, take care of them. So how do we go about it?
Again, I mean, really, this is it's hardwired into us, right? We want to protect. We have to change what is being called rape culture. We have to change our legal system. If we are sure, if it becomes very clear that anyone committing a sexual assault will get punished, if the level of conviction rises, I feel like that will make some kind of an inroad. But
Maybe,
otherwise, I mean, the sexual assaulters they are around us. They are in our homes. They are our family friends. They are, I mean, how do you, how do you address? One of the ways in which, and one of the things that Pooja was saying was that talking also about at a younger age, right? One of the things they're doing though in schools now is talking about good touch and bad touch, which they never did when we were kids, So there is a certain, if we can open up conversation, and talking about safety, I feel one thing, and this is my pet peeve. If one of the things we found when we were doing our research is that young people, if they were out late at night, or if they were, and they particularly go after heterosexual couples. As yet, they haven't started going after gay and lesbian couples, but that will also come presumably. But right now, mostly it's heterosexual couples. The police will suddenly go on an obscenity drive. They won't do it all the time, but suddenly they'll go on anti-obscenity drive, and they'll start picking up couples from various places. And one of the things they do is they tell the girls, shall we tell your parents? Now, the worst thing about this, shall we tell your parents, is that for those girls, their parents are more frightening than that policeman. And my question really is that what would change if those girls and those boys could reply by saying, no need for you to call my parents, I already called my parents are coming here. That if we could back our children, if we could tell our children that even when I don't agree with you, I have your back. Of course, don't kill anybody, but other than that, I have your back. What would change? What would change in the world? So I feel one of the ways in which we could keep our children and our students and the young people we live and work with safer is if we can open up channels of communication. They could talk about the violences they face. If they know that we will not blame them for violence that's taken place against them, I feel, and the legal system, But violence is a reality. It happens everywhere. So one of the ways in which to address it is to say, we will address it when it happens and we will try our best to prevent it.
Dr. Shilpa, that was an amazing lecture. Very comprehensive and diverse at the same time.
Thank you.
So a lot of questions came to my mind, and I don't know whether it's a question or what I'm going to say, but you talked about women walking on the streets or being in public spaces without reason. But our public spaces are not even designed for women who are on the street with reason. Women, pregnant women, normal elderly women, young women, they're not designed. I being an urbanist and architect, I'll always look for some gap to find out if I was actually looking for some gap where I can find out something for gendered urbanism or something that bruises up my ideas on the gendered urbanism or architecture. And I read one book called Ways of Seeing. I'm sure you read it by John Burgess.
John Burgess, yeah.
So therein he says, women are conditioned to look at the way men look at them. So every woman is constantly making herself conscious of the fact, how a man is looking at me. So when she's in public space, she's already conscious of that. And then on top of it, like you said somebody giving a glaze. I mean, there is no freedom whatsoever for women. Yeah. So in this thing, I think the more research needs to be done. What would you say if there are so many things?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and what you said about our streets being one of the other things that we don't talk enough about is how our streets look to the disabled. They are completely inaccessible, right? And this is something that we deeply need to address. And also, by corollary, as the disability rights activist and scholar Anita Ghai says, we are all temporarily able-bodied. She calls all of us tabs, right? We are all, eventually we will all be old and we will all be, in some way, our mobility will be impaired in some way or the other. One of the things we found very interesting, and this is as an aside, is that when we talk to old women felt far more comfortable in public space than younger women. And then we had a thought and we started interviewing older men. So older women said, young men are so nice to me, they give me seats in the bus and and a lifetime of like looking over your shoulder and a lifetime of, so they now start accessing public space with great confidence. I mean, even if they're walking slowly. Whereas old men are used to being young men. They are used to be walking on the streets as if they own them. And now suddenly they are slightly wobbly, they think someone is going to rob them. They are deeply anxious about public space in a way that old women are not. So we thought that was a really interesting contrast between older women and older men. But one of the things we thought about, and one of the things we used to do, we had a map where we would have people draw a line from A to B and how they would walk. And the last segment of it, and we wrote a paper on it, which I'll send you all. Shilpa Phadke has a paper herself, and then two of us wrote a paper, and might be sort of something that you might find interesting. But the last segment, on the one side it had a park, and it had a footpath, which had a fence, a 4-foot high fence. A lovely footpath and a park, it had trees. On the other side, we said there was low-cost housing which spilled out onto the streets, which means like people are doing stuff on the footpath. And we would do this in various workshops, including architecture colleges. And often when we would go to an architecture college to do a workshop, the architecture students would be sitting there saying, why are we talking about gender? And things were different 20 years ago. Now I think every architecture college talks about gender. It was not so common then. So the students would be sitting there thinking, what are they doing? And then we would make them do this exercise. And most of the students, particularly the women, would walk on the low-cost housing side, okay, where activities are spilling out onto the streets. And this side, it's got tree line, it's got a footpath. But remember, the footpath has a fence on both sides, so it's fenced in. And so then we would show the students where they were walking or whatever. And then we'd ask them, we'd say, all right, you would walk on this side of the road. Which side would you design? Right? And then suddenly it would hit off, because all of them would design this beautiful thing. But one of the things we found is that no woman wants to walk in an enclosed space. So if there's a footpath which is fully closed, some of them would walk on the road outside the footpath. But nobody wanted to walk in a footpath where there's no escape. Right? So these are things that are design elements that we can think about. But certainly, I mean, our streets, as you say, are not designed for anybody.
Any more questions from the audience? Thank you, ma'am. It was a wonderful lecture. In fact, the moments you described about walking in Marine Drive during the night, these were things that now feels like a luxury because nowadays, whenever you go there, they actually shoo you away. And I remember that was one of the reasons why when my parents asked me which city you want to, settle in be, I chose Mumbai because that memory of, being there. And I felt so safe at that moment where I could just walk all the way till Vadala just from there. So there was something that stayed with me because I've realized that city where you are, you realize how you feel and how gendered it is. That decision of where you want to live kind of depends on all these aspects of safety, of how you feel there when you're living alone, when you're a single woman traveling in the city. So all those points, something that you talked about. And another one I wanted to add was the recent news about how the tuition timings of
In
the girls.
Uttar Pradesh, that after
Yes,
8 o'clock, no?
yes.
Yeah.
That was something that I felt that, I'm glad all these points that you talked about, we're definitely going to have a discussion with the students because this is something that we feel do not matter in design, but it does.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's, I think, a great note to end on.
And
Yeah.
one point I wanted to actually ask was, it's not to do with this talk, but then in the description it talked about how you're researching on friendship. And if possible, if you could just kind of tell us how you're looking at it, because I found it very interesting.
So what we're doing, what we're talking about friendship is that often we say friends like family, right? And when we say friends like family, you privilege the family. It's just saying my friends are so close, they're like my family. So which means your family is like, so we privilege either the family or we privilege our romantic relationships, right? But in fact, all of us make very, very deep friendships, which are significant relationships in our life. So what we're trying to think about is that what if we centered friendship and how would the world look different? So for instance, now you have the Uttarakhand government has come out with a uniform civil code where they want you to register live-in relationships. Okay. Now there are two things. One, you could create an enabling mechanism saying, if you want to register, you can register. Now, what they have done is not that. They have said, if you don't register, we'll put you in jail. So now what happens to all those men and women who are friends with each other who share a house? Do they have to go and what are they going to go and register? Yeah, they are not in a romantic relationship with each other. Can we no longer live with our friends? How are we going to look at this? Why is the state so interested in who is involved romantically with each other? And so this focus on romance precludes the joy and that if we were to say instead and the question that we are trying to raise is that what if we said that we can buy houses with our friends, we can take loans with our friends, we can put our friends on our insurance, we can put friends on our bank accounts. I mean, actually all of this is possible, but it's very difficult. You can buy a house with a friend. You can put your friend on your insurance. But the layers of paperwork it requires is much more difficult than putting your spouse on your paperwork or buying a house with your spouse. So if we took away all that, paperwork, instead of saying go register, you say do it with anybody. So that's the line of thinking, and we recently edited a book where we invited people to talk about their experiences of friendship, both the joy of friendship but also the grief. Nobody talks about friendship breakups. If you break up with a romantic partner, everyone will sympathize with you. But if you break up with your friend, it might be just as painful, but people expect you to recover. Yeah. So what if we paid more attention? That's the line which we are thinking.
Ma'am, just one question. It was wonderful to listen to you over the book. After going through the book, there are many things that we have taken for granted in our mind, that book questions, and you start feeling that you get the realization about taking things for granted about women in public spaces and how we relate to public spaces. My question is about one point that you touched upon was about women in that phase of being a mother, being a new mother, and their relation with their working space, how they are treated. So do you have any observation when the
kind of or the type of gender that is sitting in the managerial position, and their approach when there are women employees, and their approach towards women who are in that phase is different than like, is there any difference in approach?
I haven't actually done enough research, but before I went for that talk, I was trying to do some research, and I found a piece that said that Indra Nui used to take her daughter to work and make her sleep under her desk. And you've read that. I can see you've also seen that article, which I thought was so horrifying. Imagine having to make your child sleep under your desk. So there's this kind of. But one of the things I've heard also from people my age when they were in their 30s is that a lot of their mentors and women who were sort of successful, they said that they found a lot of those women barely took any maternity leave. So they would go like for 3 weeks and all. So he said that they're not taking, and in India is among the countries where you are entitled to 3 whole months, right? And if you work in the government, as some of us do, we get 6. Yeah. So that the fact that they don't take the 3 months that they're entitled to makes it out that those who actually take the 3 months are bad employees. So they were saying that it's important that those who have this thing should use these, that those kinds of things, because we need to really push these things. But I haven't done enough research to really comment.
So just want to share something very cute actually. I always find that little kids, before they are pounced on by conditionality, they have very weird observations. So there is this niece when she was really young, I think 5 or 6. Her friend was a boy. He came for Ganpati celebrations and he wore a nail paint. Because his sister wore, so he also wore. So then my niece's mother said, "Arey, tu kashala lavlas? Tu tar mulga hai." So my niece goes, she's like, "But when Ganpati Bappa, being a boy, can wear a nail paint, see, look at his murti, he's wearing a nail paint. I think every boy can wear a nail paint, and I think if he wants to, he should." So that was one. And the other, something which bothers me every time, but I think people would pounce on me if I think more on it, is that she questioned me one day and she goes like, "Mau, why is it Bharat Mata? Why is it not Bharat Papa?" So I said, "How does that make a difference?" She's like, "No, it does, no? Mammas do so much work. Now they have to work for the country also. Now they have to take care of the country also. Can't Papa just do that little thing? That one thing, take it away from her." So I had no answer to that. And I was like, but yeah, it's quite an observation.
So important, yeah.
Any more questions from students? Okay. So I would like to express our heartfelt gratitude to our speaker, Dr. Shilpa Phadke.
Thank you so much.
Your presence here has added immense value to our gathering, and your expertise in this field has enlightened us in many ways. Your talk has definitely sensitized us on many societal issues, and especially the accessibility of women in public spaces. We are deeply grateful for your insights and knowledge you shared with us today. Now I would like to invite our Vice President of CTES Society, Mapankar Sir, and our Principal Alka Ma'am to present a token of appreciation to Dr. Shilpa Phadke. As we conclude this event, we want to extend our sincere thanks to our previous speakers, Shubhamgi Bhujbal, Akshata Acharya, and today's speaker, Dr. Shilpa Phadke, for your gracious presence and your inspiring words. And as we come to the closure of this memorable event, I would like to extend our gratitude to our governing council members, our principal Alka ma'am, for initiating this dialogue and giving us all this opportunity to be a part of this. Our Women's Development Cell, Committee E, our Student Council, and all those individuals who have made this gathering a resounding success. This event would not have been possible without your dedication and contribution. To each and every one of you who volunteered your time, energy, and expertise, we say thank you. We would like to express our appreciation to those who tirelessly worked behind the scenes, the event organizer, the technical and logistical support team, and all the unsung heroes who ensured that everything ran seamlessly. Your meticulous planning and hard work have not gone unnoticed, and we are deeply grateful. Lastly, to the attendees, thank you for being a part of this event. Your presence, enthusiasm, and engagement have made the occasion all the more special. All of you who contributed in big or small ways, we extend our deepest gratitude. Your commitment to making this event a successful success has been truly inspiring. We look forward for future events like these. Thank you one and all, and a very happy Women's Day.